Welcome to News Beacon, your trusted source for breaking headlines, global insights, and sharp analysis from around the world. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. The Alaska Highway is more than a road, it's Alaska's vital link to the rest of America, threading through the wilds of Canada. It's the route for families, truckers, and anyone needing to drive between Alaska and the lower 48. Without it, Alaska is cut off, reliant on costly flights or long sea journeys. This open passage has always symbolized the deep trust between the U.S. and Canada. For Alaskans, it's not just about convenience, it's about survival, connection, and economic lifeblood. But on August 15, 2025, everything changed. Canada abruptly closed the highway, shattering decades of assumed access. Thousands were stranded, and Alaska's only land lifeline was suddenly severed. The consequences were immediate, and only beginning to unfold. On August 15, 2025, Canada's Prime Minister stood before the nation and the world, announcing a decision that would send shockwaves across North America: the immediate closure of key land border crossings between Canada and the United States. Effective immediately, non-essential U.S. travelers heading to or from Alaska were barred from crossing, leaving many stranded and confused at the border. The official explanation cited escalating environmental protests along the critical highway routes. Canadian officials argued that these demonstrations had grown increasingly disruptive, threatening not only public safety but also the fragile ecosystems along the border. The closure was sweeping and uncompromising. Almost all civilian and commercial traffic came to a halt. Only the most essential shipments, such as medical supplies and food, were permitted to pass, and even these faced intense scrutiny and delays at the checkpoints. However, many in the United States were skeptical. They suspected that the border shutdown was less about environmental concerns and more a calculated response to a recent and heated trade dispute between the two countries. Within just a few hours, U.S. vehicles lined up at border crossings were turned away, handed pamphlets explaining the closure, but offering no real solutions or timelines for reopening. Hundreds of Americans already traveling in Canada suddenly found themselves in limbo. Some were told to turn back immediately, while others were forced to wait indefinitely, their travel plans and even livelihoods thrown into chaos. The closure was total, swift, and left no room for negotiation. Highways that once bustled with cross-border traffic now stood eerily empty, guarded by closed gates and warning signs. For those caught mid-journey, confusion quickly turned to fear and frustration. Many scrambled to find alternate routes or make urgent phone calls to loved ones, unsure of when or if they would be able to continue their journeys. The message from Canadian authorities was unmistakable. The road to Alaska, a vital link for many, was now completely closed off. In a matter of hours, the border, once a symbol of friendship, cooperation, and open travel, had transformed into an impassable barrier, leaving both nations to grapple with the consequences of this unprecedented closure. The impact of the border closure was immediate, sweeping through communities and upending lives in an instant. What had been a routine crossing for many suddenly became an insurmountable barrier, leaving people on both sides in shock and disbelief. Families on vacation, Alaskans trying to return home, and truckers hauling essential goods all found themselves stranded in unfamiliar towns, their journeys abruptly and unexpectedly cut short. The sense of confusion was palpable as people tried to make sense of what was happening. Campgrounds and motels quickly filled to capacity, overflowing with Americans who suddenly had nowhere else to go. Parking lots became makeshift campsites, and small motels struggled to accommodate the surge of desperate travelers. Many faced impossible choices. Some were forced to abandon their vehicles and belongings, unsure if they would ever be able to return for them. Others waited in costly limbo, spending night after night in cramped motel rooms or sleeping in their cars, hoping for news that never seemed to come. The emotional toll was immense. People missed work, children's school years were put on hold, and urgent medical needs went unmet. The uncertainty gnawed at everyone, amplifying stress and fear. Savings evaporated rapidly as families spent money on hotels, food, and unexpected expenses, with no clear end in sight. Every day brought new financial strain. The lack of clear information from officials only deepened the anxiety. Rumors spread quickly, and people clung to their phones, desperate for updates or any sign of hope. For many, it felt like being held hostage by a political crisis far beyond their control. The border, once a gateway, now felt like a prison wall. The closure wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a full-blown crisis, drawing national attention and sparking emergency meetings as the situation grew more dire. Military personnel, job seekers, and those needing urgent medical care were all trapped, their plans and futures put on indefinite hold. The human cost was real and heartbreaking, thousands of stories of frustration, desperation, and fear, all unfolding along a border that had suddenly become an unyielding wall. Alaska's connection to the rest of the country was suddenly, painfully fragile, with a single decision severing vital lifelines and leaving an entire region isolated. The sense of isolation was overwhelming, as people stared out at empty roads and closed gates, wondering when, or if, they would be able to continue their journeys home. The economic shock was immediate. The Alaska Highway is the backbone of the state's supply chain. When it closed, trucks carrying food, fuel, and building materials were stopped cold. Small businesses couldn't pivot to expensive air or sea freight. Store shelves emptied quickly, construction projects stalled. A single delayed shipment could cost thousands and threaten jobs. Mechanics, restaurants, and families all felt the pinch. The closure exposed Alaska's vulnerability. Its economy and communities depend on a single fragile link. The sense of being cut off and forgotten deepened. Alaskans pride themselves on resilience, but this crisis revealed just how dependent they are on that highway. The closure shook community confidence and left many wondering about the future. Economic stability now hinged on a political standoff. The ripple effects reached every corner of the state. News of the sudden closure swept through Washington with lightning speed, sending shockwaves across the political landscape. Within minutes, former President Trump issued a response, making it clear he would not remain silent in the face of what he saw as a direct challenge to American interests. Taking to his favored social media platform, Trump denounced Canada's move as an act of hostility, accusing the Canadian government of betraying a long-standing partnership. He didn't mince words, promising that the United States would not stand idly by and vowing to take strong, immediate action. In a fiery statement, Trump declared, "We built that highway, and now they're closing it to us? It's not going to happen." His words resonated with his base, echoing his familiar America First rhetoric and stoking a sense of injustice among his supporters. He dismissed Canada's official explanation as nothing more than a pathetic excuse, insisting that the real motives were political and aimed at undermining the United States. Trump promised a powerful response, warning that there would be consequences for what he called a blatant provocation. At a hastily arranged press conference, Trump announced a sweeping relief effort for those affected by the closure. He pledged to use every tool at his disposal to pressure Ottawa into reopening the border, signaling a willingness to escalate the dispute if necessary. Trump's uncompromising stance electrified his supporters, who rallied behind his call for action. The sense of urgency and defiance spread quickly, putting additional pressure on the current administration to respond forcefully. Republican leaders in Congress wasted no time echoing Trump's outrage. They held press conferences, issued statements, and demanded that the White House take decisive measures to defend American interests and restore access to the vital Alaska route. Trump's intervention transformed what began as a regional crisis into a major international flashpoint. The world watched as tensions escalated, with news outlets across the globe covering the unfolding drama at the U.S. Canada border. Framing the issue as a case of America being wronged, Trump positioned himself as the nation's defender, the one willing to fight back when others hesitated. His narrative struck a chord with many who felt the country's interests were under threat. Trump's rapid and forceful response dominated headlines, setting the tone for the national debate. His actions and words became the focal point of political discussion, overshadowing other news and forcing both allies and opponents to react. The closure of the Alaska route quickly became a test of American resolve and leadership. The empty highways and guarded checkpoints symbolized the growing rift between two neighboring nations. Trump's supporters praised his bold leadership, seeing him as the only one willing to stand up for the country. Meanwhile, critics voiced concern that his aggressive approach could escalate the crisis and risk long-term diplomatic fallout. With the crisis now front and center in U.S. politics, the nation braced for what would come next, as leaders on all sides scrambled to respond to a rapidly evolving situation that had captured the world's attention. Trump's boldest move was organizing a freedom convoy to Alaska. This wasn't a government operation, but a massive, privately funded effort to aid stranded Americans and challenge the closure. The plan assembled a convoy of trucks and RVs at the border, demanding the route reopen. Social media and conservative outlets fueled the movement, with volunteers and donations pouring in. The convoy aimed to deliver supplies and make a powerful statement. Supporters saw it as patriotic. Critics and Canadian officials called it provocative and dangerous. Canada warned any unlawful crossing would be met with law enforcement. The Freedom Convoy became the story's centerpiece, a symbol of confrontation and defiance. At the border, frustration boiled over. Stranded families formed makeshift communities, sharing news and resources as they waited. Truckers, losing income by the day, were especially vocal. "This is my mortgage payment," one driver said, gesturing to his idle rig. Many felt like pawns in a political game. In the U.S., public reaction split along political lines. Trump supporters rallied behind the convoy, demanding action. Others urged caution, fearing escalation and long-term damage to U.S. Canada relations. Op-eds called for diplomacy, warning that rhetoric could harm a vital alliance. The border crisis became another front in America's political divide. For those stuck at the border, hope and anger mixed in equal measure. Behind the scenes, U.S. and Canadian diplomats scrambled for a solution. The State Department demanded answers and a timeline for reopening. Canada stood firm, citing safety concerns and sharing intelligence on the protests. Privately, Canadian officials were frustrated by Trump's convoy, seeing it as inflammatory. In Washington, political pressure mounted. Republicans called for retaliation, while Alaskan lawmakers demanded action. The Biden administration faced a tough balancing act: appear strong, but avoid damaging the U.S. Canada relationship. Too much public pressure could make Canada dig in. The administration's approach: firm demands in private, measured statements in public. The crisis became a test of diplomacy and political nerve. The stakes for both countries and for Alaska were enormous. As of August 20, 2025, the border remains closed and hundreds are still stranded. Canada shows no sign of backing down, citing ongoing security concerns. Trump's Freedom Convoy gathers at the border, raising tension and anticipation. A diplomatic breakthrough could resolve the crisis, but heated rhetoric makes that harder. A prolonged standoff could trigger economic pain, trade retaliation, or even confrontation. For those affected, hope and dread are constant companions. The Alaska route closure is now a symbol of how fragile even the closest alliances can be. The future of America's last frontier hangs in the balance.